1.
Good afternoon, students. We've come towards the end of our project management section, so that's a bit exciting. We're towards the end of yet another block of work here, so if you're up to this stage, congratulations, you're moving along nicely. So it's Alison Vella here, and also online we've got Adam and Alyssa.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
Very good. So we're going to go through the last two parts of the learning resources for the project management unit. So far we have covered everything from the beginning of the actual planning stages. We've gone through the different sections such as resources and staff and budgeting, all those sorts of things. The last session we went into a great deal of information on risk management, which is really important to be on the top of that, and thinking about not just workplace health and safety, but all the other sorts of risks that might come about with project management. So we've given some examples of projects that we personally have been involved in as well, and tried to get some thought processes going for you, I guess, on what projects you may have been involved in the past, or that you're currently involved in. And we've also talked about, if you're not in a position at the moment, and particularly part of a project, how you can perhaps even relate it to something in your own world that you've done, whether that be, management of things at home, such as undergoing renovations or things like that. So there's a lot of project management that you probably have done in your lifetime and haven't thought of it as project management. So try and, pull all of your thoughts and ideas together of what experiences you've got. So we have covered a few bits and pieces so far. So today we'll go into the last two parts of this one. And I think Adam's running the screen there, and Alyssa's got, we'll start things off.
All right, lovely.
okay, yeah, great.
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right, cool. So obviously, as you've already mentioned, Alison, with that lovely introduction, we have over the last week or so really walked through the stages of project management, and we did have a very in-depth discussion last week about the risk management process, and this week what we really want to focus on is the actual project rollout process, as well as the resourcing process, which is two other relatively large components of the whole project management itself. We're going to follow that up with the last series of learning activities, which looks at the project success and also the lessons. I guess every time that you do a project, as we talked about last week, a project is very unique, and it's very different to the regular activities or regular descriptions of your role. So it's something very unique and very different. So every time we engage in a project, there's always a great time, and it's a great opportunity for us to reflect and have a look at what our successes have been and what we could do a little bit different. So the first part of the session will look at that project rollout and resourcing, and the second part will look at the successes and the lessons that we actually learned from our project management experience. So I think Adam's got the first series of learning activities up and ready to go.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I do.
All right.
It's look, it's just in reference to what you're talking about there with rollout and resourcing. This is really the end of the project. I mean, when it comes to actually rolling out the project, you're really coming towards that logical conclusion. As Alison mentioned, we've spent a bit of time on the scoping and the planning phase, and we spent a lot of time working through risks last session. And as you mentioned, Alyssa, now we're up to the end, which is the rollout and the resourcing. For me, project rollout, especially when you're involving a lot of people in an organizational sense, there's a lot of principles that relate to what we call change management. So it's really about helping individuals through a period of change. So project rollout, one of the things you really need to keep in mind, I guess, is how does this, and it could be a new product, it could be a brand new service. If you guys remember, I was talking about a project that I had an involvement in, which was to roll out a whole range of hard phones and soft phones in a call center that had about 120 users. You can imagine the level of anxiety that was, that was there and present amongst 120 staff members, that their job was to answer the phone and to make phone calls and to use the phone system every day. And now the business was saying, okay, we've got a new way that we want you to work. So it's a change. It's a big change effectively. And quite often what happens in a project rollout is that you have to engage in what we call change management. So you effectively have to just be aware that there's a whole lot of change that people are going to be going through. And one of the keys when you're managing a project rollout is to manage that level of anxiety that you might have within your team or within the actual organisation as a whole. How does that sound to you guys? Have you guys sort of would you agree to a certain point there with project rollout and how that it's quite, I guess, some of the things you have to keep in mind are similar concepts that you see in change management?
Absolutely. I had a funny situation the other day. I was working with two people and actually asked them both, how do you feel about change in the workplace? One of them said, oh, absolutely love it. I thrive on it, bring it on. And the other one said, don't do it to me. Just stop right there. I do not like things being changed. So you've got to take in all of those different personality styles. As you said, if you're working with a large group of people that all have participation and things that they need to do to make the project a success, you've got to make sure that you do deal with all of those different people types.
And the majority of people are, and myself included to a point, I enjoy change, but it still does provide a little bit of anxiety, and I think all of us feel that way. And funnily enough, with me, it's actually the small things that are the hardest things to deal with. The big things are easy. I mean, I've lived overseas, I've moved my life around in large areas, but sometimes just the small changes, like, instead of using that piece of software, you're using this one. Or as silly as it sounds, when you upgrade a piece of software, like if I upgrade from Microsoft Outlook to the latest Outlook, it takes me forever to get comfortable, and I'm always frustrated with those little bits of change. So everybody's different, and Alison, if you had two people and now one was happy and one was not so embracing of the change, well, really the majority of people are not overly comfortable with change, and even those that appear to be comfortable still have a degree of anxiety in reference to it. So what we're talking about is, look, this is sort of coming towards the end of a given project, which is where we're actually rolling it out. So if we're opening a new store, this is the day one where we open a new store. That's what we mean by rollout. If we're, and as I said, that the day that we put the brand new telephones on the desks for all of the staff members in that call center, that was the project rollout date, also known as project implementation. So the day that the actual project rolls out. And so we've got to just be careful and manage people's anxiety levels and just be aware that everybody is going through something different. So yeah, I think it's just a good overarching thing to talk about, I guess, before we get stuck into it. These questions are a little bit all over the shop, if you'd like. They sort of chop and change. So what we might do is just go through each question by question, and it might spring each of us just to sort of mention something as we go along. How do you guys feel about that?
Sounds good.
About that.
Alrighty, I'm going to highlight the first question. And the first question here says, outline 2 communication strategies that you can implement to ensure your team members are clear about their responsibilities. Just before we jump into this question, we want you, when you're going to be doing and we'll be talking about it in the next webinar, which is our assessment support, where we talk about what you need to do for your assessment tasks, we want you to be considering all of these things from the perspective of a project manager. So you're the one in charge of putting the team members together, talking to the team, monitoring the progress of your project, communicating, all of those sorts of things that a project manager needs to do. So just think about it not from the perspective of you are one individual on a project, but you are the project manager. I think it might just help in putting this together a little bit. So yeah, the first one is 2 communication strategies that you can implement to ensure that your team members are clear about their responsibilities. There's a couple of good pages in the learning materials. Guys, if you don't mind, I might just navigate towards those learning materials for this particular subject. So we'll click on that. That's the learning materials for project management. A couple of pages that I found that might be of good value were measuring and recording progress, and supporting project team members. Those two, they sit side by side in the learning materials. I found they were quite useful for answering this question. So the question itself is in relation to communication strategy. So what can you do? How can you communicate your message to ensure that the people in your team that are working together are clear and are understanding about their roles and their responsibilities, about the day-to-day actions, so on and so forth. So one of the ways that project managers tend to do this is through what we call a progress report or a project progress report. I've been in a range of different projects where I've actually, in one particular project, I actually relied on this. It was actually I think it was 3, 4, 5 times a week. It was almost a daily email depending on what was going on, but the project manager would send out a project progress report. And it took the shape of basically it was an Excel spreadsheet that had a list of tasks, a list of people that were responsible for those tasks, comments against each of those items, expected dates for things to be done by. It gave great visibility on all other members of the team, what they were doing, and I ended up using this email, this project progress report, as pretty much as the gospel. This was my little Bible for my day-to-day activities on the project. Quite often you'd be in the meeting, there'd be 500 people in the meeting, not 500 people, but there'd be a lot of people in the meeting. Everybody wants to have their voice heard. There's so many things that are getting talked about, and we're moving on to the next one. We talk about meeting minutes. That's another way to also sort of disseminate information from a meeting. It's actually referred to here in this first paragraph. In any case, meeting minutes of meetings. But have a look at this one, measuring and recording progress, as well as the next page there, supporting project team members in relation to answering this question. But yeah, the first thing that I would say on this one, guys, and I'm happy to throw it back to you guys to have to add your bits and pieces in. I'm looking at this from the what's the most logical way to send information to my team members so that they are completely understanding on what it is that we're sending. So the project progress report is sort of the one that comes to mind straight away. What do you guys think, Alyssa?
Yeah, look, I think that reporting mechanism is a great option. I think I think in the first session when we started talking about project management, we also kind of spoke about the importance of the team members when it comes to helping achieve the success of a project as well. They're a really big part of it, and communicating to them and keeping that transparency there, and keeping them akin to what's going on and how the progress is essential in terms of maintaining motivation. So I definitely think the report is a great option. There are other ways that you can communicate, and there are lots of different strategies out there depending on the type of project that you might be working on too. And as Adam's obviously scrolling down, it is really important that the team members are aware of what their responsibilities are. And that if you don't tell them as the project manager, because their responsibilities could be considerably different to what their traditional responsibilities are, then it's going to be very difficult to kind of be able to get, kind of reach the objective of that project rollout, which is essentially very dependent on that communication strategy and people knowing exactly what's expected of them. And there are simple ways to communicate as well. It's just, I guess, defining what is the most effective way. But actually, as you said before, Adam, the whole process of making sure you've got those meeting minutes there, I think you spoke about just previously too.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to a project, in terms of those communication strategies of having that evidence and that data there to record that information can be quite essential. So having those minutes there can also be a very strong tool in terms of recording that information.
It can be as simple part of it when you're putting those minutes together, making sure that it's got all the factors in there. So when you bring up a point and say, okay, this is where we're up to at the moment and this is where it needs to move to, put down the timeline for that, so when the next step needs to be done by, and who's responsible for it. So those meeting minutes then go out to everybody, and they can see who's taking on what role and at what stage that's being done and by when it needs to be done. So and we talked about transparency last week. That was a word that came up as well. So the communication in a lot of ways needs to be a little bit transparent as well for the team members.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just thinking about this out loud. I mean, we're talking about communicating so that somebody else, is clear on what they need to do. So the key for this one is somebody else. So it's not about us and getting our message across. Sometimes as project managers, or just sometimes in general, we've said it or we've explained it, so it's done. But really the key to our communication is ensuring that the other person at the other end is understanding what we're talking about. So what are some ways, I guess, just holistically, if we're going to be communicating, what are some ways that we can generally, be sure that the other person is understanding on what we're talking about?
Are you talking in terms of just an agreement on, so say, for example, two parties involved in terms of a project, that they are in agreement of what the actual responsibilities are within the actual project realms itself?
Not necessarily an agreement, but more just to get the information across. I mean, look, we're empowered as the project managers to make sure that we are, we're providing guidance to our team members. They have an understanding on what jobs they need to do, what tasks need to be done, and so on. But our role is to make sure that they're also clear about the communications as well, which is why we have this question. How do we ensure that our project team are, understanding of the information? For me, there's a number of simple ways to do this. It's really important that we're communicating to the understanding of our listener. So one way of doing it is to be aware of potential limitations that our listener might have, whether it's barriers in language, don't use too many bits of jargon or whatever it might be. But we need to check that the listener's understanding is correct as well. Remember, when we're in a meeting, we're in a group situation, there's 10 of us in the meeting. Okay, everybody, so is everybody clear on what they need to do? Now, there's a problem with just saying those broad sort of things in front of everybody. I'm probably not going to stick my hand up in front of 10 other of my co-workers and say, you know what, I didn't actually understand what you just said back then. Do you mind saying it again? I'm not going to feel comfortable doing that. The project manager needs to be really sure that each of their team members are completely clear. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can actually engage with them on a one-to-one, so have a chat to them personally, because it just removes any of that sort of group dynamic or that group talk that can exist when you're in a group situation. So another way is just to get the listener just to repeat the information, the key information that you want them to know too. So instead of me saying, are you aware of what you need to do now, and just waiting for a yes or no response, I could ask them just to rephrase what it is that I've actually asked you to do, or could you just tell me exactly what it is that you're going to be getting on with for the next 24, 48 hours. That's another way of doing it. Do you guys remember that image that went around Facebook a while ago? There was that dress.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
remember that dress?
Yes.
The different colours.
Is it? Yeah. Yeah. The percept. Yep.
So some people saw a blue and black dress.
Yeah.
Some people saw a gold and white dress. People saw different things, and it was the same image. And that's communication. That's, I guess, what we've got to be careful about when we're communicating, is that the same thing communicated can mean two different things to two different people, even if it's said in the same fashion. So we've got to just be careful that we are understanding what our people are, or what our team members are picking up, what they're aware of, and so on and so forth. Guys, are there any other just broad stroke sort of communication thoughts or ideas here for project managers?
I guess that, if we were talking about in terms of clearly defining responsibilities, and you wanted just to make sure that, I guess, people were really, really clear about, what their responsibilities were. We go back last week, we talk about the whole planning process and the project scope, even using that, planning process to really define and outline what people's responsibilities are, so that maybe even some form of documentation, additional KPIs or incentive-based KPIs that, would be structured around in addition to their traditional job description could also be a way of clearly defining those so people know exactly what they are supposed to be doing and there's an agreement there in terms of that.
Yeah.
So an extension of a
Yep.
job description or something. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud as we kind of talk about it,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
I agree. I was sort of thinking the whole KPIs type of thing, specifically for this particular project. And then maybe mini appraisals along the way. So you get to have that one-on-one situation with someone to address those KPIs and make sure that through every step of the way, they're still, performing in the way that they need to perform. Is there any grey areas that have come up? Then they can actually put that forward in a one-on-one situation that, oh, look, I thought I was supposed to be doing this, this and this. It now seems that I'm doing an extra 3 or 4 tasks. Is that how this has changed? Do we need to change the KPIs? Or are we sticking with, the original plan? Can we bring somebody else in to assist? All sorts of conversations could start up from something like that.
Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shall we move on to the next question? So that was the first question that we've been looking through, which I'll go back to. It was this one: outline 2 communication strategies that you can implement to ensure that your team members are clear about their responsibilities. So you've got a few ideas from that chat. Have a look at those materials that we've pointed you towards as well. Let's have a look at the next question. So the second question here: what project record keeping systems are you required to maintain for projects within your organisation? Again, there's a great page in the learning materials for this one. I'm just going to find it for you, which is auditing and record keeping systems, which is right here. So guys, just go to this page here, auditing and record keeping systems for your project. I guess the question I'll put out to you guys: why do we keep records for our project? So why do we even worry about this sort of stuff?
Gosh, well, we definitely need, like, if we're looking at things like outcomes and we're looking at things like a project being a very unique part or a unique extension to the workplace, you've got very specific, clear outcomes and objectives of a project. And I think data and evidence and recording, that's where you can actually justify and you can actually see your outcomes. And without that data, which is obviously the purpose of record keeping, as well as things like compliance and legislative requirements as well, the project almost becomes obsolete because there's no actual data to support your actual findings and your progress essentially over time. I think it's that knowledge that you really need, and you've got there.
Absolutely.
You've got correspondence, and we obviously briefly about meeting minutes and how you communicate, and you correspond with your team members. And as you've got here, data. I mean, samples, prototypes, financial data. Gosh, you can't just walk up to somebody and say that you need additional funds for your project. There has to actually be some kind of there has to be information there to support any decisions that you're going to make or things that you're going to change.
Well, how will you know if you've gone over budget if you haven't kept sort of records on what you've spent and so forth? So, absolutely, it's needed.
Yeah. The good old data.
I know one of the projects I was involved in, we did a lot of testing. So we were checking to see that the items that the company needed were being met. So we were talking about the functional or the BRD, the business requirements documentation, a few weeks ago. So, one of my jobs was to do a lot of testing on this particular project, and all of that information that I was testing was kept. We saved that information. It was filed on the project. So if anything came up later, that the vendor could say, it was actually tested on this date, it worked at that given time. And if you think about technical projects, that things are involving computers and new systems and things like that, you do need to keep that sort of data on hand. But yeah, go to that page for information on auditing and record keeping systems for that second question. Alison, did you want to add anything more to that one?
My thinking on that one as well is how important is that going to be after you've finished everything? So the project is totally finished, it's been rolled out, it's a huge success, or maybe it's not.
Exactly.
How can you actually go back and have a look at what went right and what went wrong? The more documentation you've got is going to help pin down any issues along the way, and that's so important.
That's a really, really good point. I mean, usually at the end of a project, we'll do a review session, we'll have a chat with everybody, we'll bring stakeholders into the fold, and we'll talk about what we did really well and what maybe we could do a little bit better next time to improve our success. All of that information that you're talking about would be incredibly important in that review situation as well. So it's a really, really good point.
Some of your stakeholders as well. I mean, if you've got a financial controller or an accountant or something involved, you can pretty much be sure that they're going to want to see every little piece of documentation that was related to money spent, quotes received, all of that sort of thing. So the actual important stakeholder there, you need to do the right thing by them.
And you've just actually, sprung my mind into gear here, Alison. It's also a risk management thing too. I mean, what happens if somebody gets sued or there's some, legal issues on the project? You're going to want to have all of your ducks in a row. I.e., you're going to want to have all of your paperwork handy, so that you can, minimise the likelihood of having to go through litigation.
Exactly.
Great points. Great points. Excellent. Alrighty. Let's have a look at question 3. All projects require resourcing. What are some of the considerations? Sorry, I've just lost that. What are some of the considerations that need to take place within your role as project manager when determining the correct levels? Again, there's a great page in the learning materials for this one, so I'm just going to look for it. I think it is identify project resources right there. So a good one to go to is this page here, identifying project resources. Question here, projects require resourcing. What are some of the considerations that all projects need to take place within your role as a project manager to determine the correct level? So 2 types of resources. There are people, or human resources, and there are things, materials, just stuff. So what we're talking about is when you're working out how many people and how many things we need for our project, what are some of the things that you should be thinking about? What are the considerations that need to take place? You've got a whole range of those considerations in the right box there.
And we're really looking for some examples as well, not just to say, people, human resources and equipment or something like that. Give us some examples. Actually, explain to us what your understanding of that particular topic is.
Yep, absolutely. So instead of just saying cost, explain, maybe like a sentence explaining what you mean by that for an example.
Yeah.
Okay, should we go on to the next question? Let's have a look at that one. Identify any project you've been involved in or researched. What were the key safety risks that needed consideration? This is sort of a bit of a double up from last week because we talked a little bit about risk last week. So should we mention anything else on top of what we've talked about last week?
I think that we really went into a lot of depth last week when it came to the whole concept of risks, and we talked a lot about different types of risks. And I think I think that's quite a nicer, easier question than some of the risk-based questions that we had last week. So I think the students should have enough information.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thoughts on it, because they're defining key safety risks. And last week we did talk a lot about things like, I think, commercial risks and legal compliance risks and all those types of things. So safety risks should be easy.
This should be an easy one. That's right. Cool. I think we'll leave it at there. Question 5 is a short, I think it's a 2 or 3 minute YouTube clip for the guys to watch. The question there is, what did you learn from the YouTube video in relation to transitioning the project team? And what were the 2 most important areas to focus on and help your team manage the changes during each stage of the project? Look, guys, this one's all, again, talking about how you help to manage change with people. And that's what this video is really talking about. How do you actually do that? What are the ways that you can actually manage change? We talked about it a little bit before, but for me, managing people's anxiety when it comes to change and change management, communicate. You can't over-communicate. The key with anxiety that I've discovered is that it's really the uncertainty is the big thing. It's uncertainty that actually sets off our fight and flight response, which can send us into a bit of a loop, an adrenaline loop, as it were. It's really the anxiety the anxiety that comes from not knowing. So wherever possible, we want to remove any sense of not knowing from our staff members or from our project team. So when we're getting into that project rollout, there's a lot of things happening. When we come into the end of the project, there's a lot of things going on. We've just got to remove any of those bits of uncertainty in order to help our team transition and manage through. But just watch that video when answering this question, guys, because it's a pretty straightforward video and pretty clean. Anything else to add to that one, team?
I think I'm good.
Happy days.
Happy days.
So that one ended that set. Let's move to the next set, which is the last learning activity for this subject, project success and lessons. You're almost there, guys. You're almost ready to get stuck into the assessment tasks for project management, this second subject. So let's have a look at some of the questions. Again, they're a little bit around the joint, so we'll just sort of answer them as we go and hopefully touch on all the right areas. Let's have a look at the first question. List examples of typical KPIs or metrics that you would use to measure project success. So we did a little bit of chatting, or we talked a little bit about, I think in the first session, about how to, projects, measures of project success and things like that, and talking about the project scoping stage. Let's maybe break down some of the terminology here.
Yeah.
Do one of you guys want to talk through the word KPI, what a KPI actually means, or?
I think most students should have a bit of an idea on that one, hopefully have heard of it in the workforce as well, but your key performance indicators. So the things that you must work towards, your actual responsibilities in your particular role. So as we said before, if you come up with a specific list of KPIs directed at the project, so it might be over and above what they normally do on a day-to-day basis. And I think one of the most important things about KPIs is having them fairly specific. If you make them too generalized, they're a little bit harder to follow and people can get off the track a little bit. So having fairly specific KPIs, I think, particularly in something like this, would be really important.
So a key performance indicator. That's what KPI stands for?
That's it.
And look, in sport, a KPI, I mean, if I'm playing baseball or cricket, it might be the batting average. Or if I'm a football player, it might be how many average disposals per game. That might be my key performance indicators. That's, how do you know if you've been successful? How do you know if you've done a good job? They're the sort of questions you might ask. On the stock exchange, it might be dividends or the rate of return. In manufacturing, a typical KPI might be the cycle time. So how long does it take, for one input to make it through the entire process chain, for example. Some of the typical KPIs you might find in project management are things like labour costs. How much did it cost us to put this whole project together? If this was to be a successful project, we'd really want labour costs to be under a certain amount. It could also be quality examples. So, I mean, if the project is to design and to develop something brand new, what's the quality of the item that comes out at the other end? That might be one way that we're going to measure the success of our particular project. It also might be feedback from our key stakeholders. Some things are easier to measure than others, and especially when we're trying to increase the level of satisfaction or deal with something that's quite intangible, which we'll talk about in a sec. Hard to do, but you can, measure performance through feedback and things like that. Some of the obvious ones might be increase in sales or market share, or just when your project completion date was. There's some of the sort of typical project management ones, I guess. The learning materials also talk about this as well. Have you any other ones that you think we should mention here for the guys?
I mean, I think that there can be, depending on, I guess, what the project is. I think that a KPI or a key performance indicator. I mean, I think every project needs to have some kind of objective and some kind of direction and a strong like series of targets or milestones, even, which are obviously smaller kind of KPIs. You could almost say little things along the way. I mean, I guess it's essential in terms of measuring the success of your project and having something that is very specific, as you mentioned, Alison. I think in that very first unit that we looked at, which was about professional development, we really looked at the whole concept of having, goals and the importance of SMART goals and the importance of having something that you can use as a motivator and you can see, what your target is. So, I mean, you can have anything from like you mentioned before, Adam, a time based KPI or a labour cost KPI, and I guess it would just depend on what the project is, and there can be a lot of KPIs associated with a bigger project, especially. But yeah, having an objective or having some kind of goal, driver, motivator, yeah.
Just like one of the previous questions, and I'd like, Alison, I think you mentioned it, get the students just to actually sort of expand on the point a little bit. So we've sort of gone through a couple of typical KPIs that you could use to measure a project's success. Do one of two things for us. Either give us an example of a project and then list those ones, or just explain what you mean by labour costs. If that's the example that you'd like to use, give us an example. Now, typically with KPIs, they involve numbers as well. It's almost always going to involve a particular number. You actually mentioned the word specific before, which I think is 100% spot on, Alison. You've got to be really, really down and specific when you're setting goals, and same with setting KPIs, because they are just performance goals. It's almost impossible to set a KPI without using a number. So when you're thinking about putting an example of a KPI, I would like you to actually even include some numbers. So whatever that number might be. So under a certain dollar amount, by a certain date, under a certain percentage of errors detected, whatever it might be.
Very, very
Cool.
analytical,
Sorry.
very, very data-based. Yep.
It is. It is. Do you want to jump on the next one? Alyssa, if I highlight this question for you?
Sure. Okay, so that second question says, identify any project you have been involved in or researched, and it says, make a list of all the deliverables. Were they achieved, and was this project considered a success in relation to other elements of project management, i.e. end user, customer, etc.? So I guess there's a series of different parts or components for that question. So obviously we want you to identify. So again, going back to being quite specific here, what I would be looking for here is I would be looking for you to actually give me a bit of an overview or some background actually on the project that you had been involved in. So rather than just go straight to a list of the deliverables, I'd like to see a little bit of background so I can kind of understand the deliverables in context to your actual project itself. So I'd give an example of a project I'd been involved in or maybe researched. Then I would probably look at make a list of all the deliverables and were they achieved. So now when we talk about deliverable, and just correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding of the term deliverable is what you essentially had I guess, ideally promised in terms of the project outcome. So what would the project essentially deliver into that workplace? So what are the outcomes bringing to the workplace? Okay, so did you achieve those types of things? Was the aim of the project, say, for example, it was to increase, I guess to use your example, Adam, where you were implementing that new piece of technology into the workplace or the new phone system? And maybe the deliverable was to improve efficiency, say, for example. Well, was that achieved?
It's actually the other way around. So a deliverable in this context is actually what the actual direct goal is. So a deliverable is usually a tangible item that we go, yes, that's the due date. It's measurable. It's specific. We're opening a new store. Was the store opened? Yes, it was. cool, the project delivered what it was meant to deliver. We actually, and we talk about this in the next session when we show the guys the project brief, the guys are needing to actually identify on their own project goals and outcomes. So when we're talking about, and you know what, it's just a terminology thing. I mean, you could, yeah, we could be talking about outcomes or goals in the same sentence, but for this purpose, we've sort of separated them. So with deliverables, we're talking about what are the goals. So with outcomes, and this is for our project, we're actually talking about what the benefits are. So what are the non-tangibles that happen? What are the benefits that happen as a result of? The project that I was involved in, the project was, well, we need new telephone systems by this date that can do the following things. Was that delivered? Yes, it was. What are some of the benefits or outcomes? They're the intangibles. So that might be to increase efficiency. That might be to increase the general happiness of the people that are using those telephone systems. They're the additionals that happen as a result. For this question, we want to just focus on the specific deliverables. What is the project meant to be delivering? What are the actual tangible, specific, measurable items on this particular project? So none of the additional sort of, benefits that can come as a result, which the guys will get a bit of practice in sort of separating those two when we take them through the project brief in the next workshop. So I'll give you an example in terms of repainting your house. A new coat of paint is the goal or the objective or the deliverable. So the project will deliver a brand new coat of paint. However, the increased enjoyment or pleasure or satisfaction that you get from maybe an increase in traffic or more people that come and visit your house because of the new coat of paint, they are the intangibles. So we're just talking about the deliverables, which are the key items that we're trying to achieve on any given project. Sound good, guys?
Excellent.
Yes.
Alrighty. Question 3, describe 3 ways you could evaluate the success of a project. Again, we've sort of touched on this one already. We've sort of, in fact, we've sort of looked at it a little bit in question 1 too, but we've also looked at this previously. So I'm going to leave this one up to the students to sort of have a go at. Did you guys want to add anything to this one? Any experiences you've had or any examples that you could help the students with this one, or are we happy for students just to jump in and just describe 3 ways that they could evaluate the success of any given project?
Mm. For this one, just as a clear up, are we looking for like examples based on a project, or we are just looking for the measure?
Look, if the guys...
So say, for example, describe 3 ways you could evaluate the success of a project. You could evaluate the success of a project through, say, for example, external feedback or something. So do we want them to give us the mechanisms, or do we want them to give us an example based on a project that they've listed maybe in question 2? Or are you happy just with the mechanism? Yeah.
Yeah, look, the word that screams out there is describe, so it's a description of 3 different ways that you could evaluate. So if they just say feedback, that's not descriptive enough for me. However, if they give us an actual example of a project and say, based on this project, here is a method that you could actually evaluate, and they just write the word feedback, I would say that's fine.
Okay.
Although it's probably better for the students just to focus on more of a description of the, of what that actually means to gather feedback, if that's their example, for example. So look, either way, I'd be happy if the students sort of put a bit of effort into their answer either way.
Cool. Okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yep.
Sounds good. Alrighty. Next question: why is it important to involve team members in the review of a project?
Why wouldn't
you?
It's a team effort from the start, isn't it? So you want to keep them involved beyond that end of the actual project. So yes, you've worked out, were your deliverables delivered? Has it been successful? Or if not, why not? So you can't just sit back and go, okay, yep, everything worked, I've ticked all the boxes, that's it, over and done with. You do need to involve people for their input, their feedback at that end point. Getting, different stakeholders perhaps, involved as well. But the team members are the ones that have done the work throughout. So they need to know, have they been successful? Did they do the job really well? And if they saw any problems throughout, have the chance to actually, voice their opinions and their ideas at that point as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We talked last week about transparent communication, try not to hide or mislead people on information. So that's why we involve them in the early part. But at the end, if we're a project team that's about to roll off and do another project, we'd be silly not to get that feedback from the previous one, because we could actually improve the way that we work. We can improve the likelihood of success on our project. We can get even better feedback than we had last time. So, why wouldn't you shoot for the stars?
Absolutely.
Yep. Through that process, you could also identify, maybe better ways, cheaper ways to do something. You could also learn a little bit about yourself as a project manager and ways to communicate with your team a little bit more effectively, things like that too. So yeah, there's certainly a number of ways. The materials also reflect on this one too, guys. Cool. I think we're rolling through these questions. Unfortunately, these questions are a little bit choppy for our liking, which means it's sort of hard to get stuck into one conversation per se, and we've sort of gone through some of these already. So looking at the last question for this set, and then that'll be the end of this session, the resource support session number 3. So the last one is identify any projects that either one that you've been involved in or one you've researched. Describe 3 lessons learnt. So there's 2 parts to this question. Describe 3 lessons learnt, and how would you communicate the lessons in an effective way? So you've sort of gone through the process of going through the theory and answering questions and putting yourself in a project manager's a frame of thinking. What are 3 lessons, either from what you've experienced through just sitting here and listening into the webinars and going through the learning material and answering the questions, or through your experience in being involved in a project team, or something that you've even researched? Happy for students also to go off and research, lessons learnt in project management. You'll find articles, you'll find things out there online if you want to go down that track as well. We want to see 3 clear lessons here. So we want you to describe 3 clear lessons. Don't just say communicate, or don't just say communicate more effectively. We want you to actually describe the actual lesson. So if you're talking about improved communication techniques or strategies, give us a really, be really specific about what it is that you're going to do to improve that communication, or whatever your strategy or whatever your technique might be. And the second part of that question is that how are you going to communicate those lessons in an effective way? So we want you to presume that you're entering a brand new project team, and you've already picked up all of these lessons, and you've got all this information that you've learned through doing the course or through previous experience. How are you going to, pass on that information? It's really important information. We don't want it to go to waste. We've just done a review of the previous project in question 4. We know that it's important to involve team members in our review. We discovered information in our review that we want to pass on. These are the lessons. We've discovered some information we want to pass on. How are we going to pass that information on? So that's the second part of the question. Describe 3 lessons and then explain how you're going to communicate those lessons in an effective way. Alyssa or Alison, would you like to add anything to this question? Either some general lessons that you've learned through project management, or just about the question, or the whole set that we've gone through today?
No, I think that there's never ever going to be the perfect project. I think that there's always something new that you're always going to learn from each experience that you have. And I guess, as we talked initially about the whole concept of project management, you can learn so much by actually being involved in a project. And I think the beauty about projects is that you're constantly learning lessons, and there's constantly ways of seeing what you could do better, or identifying areas that could be a little bit more efficient, or if you repeat similar projects in future, then you kind of take those with you, and don't forget about those lessons. I mean, they're valuable, and they may be lessons that were hard learnt, but they're obviously going to be of some benefit to you for future. Everything is a learning process. Nothing's ever perfect, and nobody ever gets it right the first time. So embrace those lessons, learn from them, and just don't take it too harsh, and just take it to the next step next time.
Look, 100%, 100%. They're really exciting project teams, and as we mentioned in the first session, if you guys get the opportunity to be part of a project team, please take it, because you're going to learn a lot about yourself and a lot about how you work with other people. As a project manager, and it's something that we're going to talk about in one of the other subjects coming up. I think it's the fourth subject, effective or team effectiveness, something like that. We just talk about the balance between maintaining the relationship side of things with human beings and maintaining what we call the task, which is the activities in any given project. Project managers tend to fall in the trap of being task-oriented, meaning that they've just focused on the job at hand. All right, we need 5 people on this job right here. Tomorrow I need 3 people over there. Hey, we need you on this job here. Any questions about what you need to do? And what ends up happening is we lose sight of the fact that we've got a whole bunch of human beings in our project. Effective teams are working in high-performing teams, which is what a project really needs to be, a high-performing team. You really need to balance the two, dynamics. So I've also got to show care and respect for the people that I'm working with as human beings, as well as focusing on the task at hand. Typically, I think project managers probably get caught up in task mode and forget that we've got human beings that, it might just be a short 30-second chat, and that's all it might take to motivate and make somebody feel really good about getting on with the next stage of their project. So just be wary of balancing the two. And look, likewise, if you're spending too much time with chatting and down the pub having a few beers and you're losing sight of the actual task, that's also something that's going to derail the project. So find the nice, healthy balance between task and what we call maintenance. Maintenance is all about, looking after the relationship aspect of the human side of, the relationship aspect of any given team.
Cool.
That was just my little tidbit at the
Fantastic.
end. Very good. Any other lessons that I guess we'd like to share, or I think we're probably ready to wrap this session up too?
There's a lot of general lessons, as you said, so we do need them to be a little bit specific, but it can be something as general, as you said, as communication. So describe exactly what you learnt, though, about your communication techniques that didn't quite go right, so what you would do next time to make that work well. Maybe it was time management, so exactly where did things break down, what happened, and so what would you do next time to make it work more effectively?
Amazing. Yep. Agreed entirely. Cool. All right, guys. It's all over to you guys to complete those last 2 learning activities, project success and lessons, and the one beforehand, which was project rollout and resourcing. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next session, where we'll actually take you through the 3 assessment tasks for this particular subject, assessment task 1, 2, and 3. I know it looks a little bit different on your screen, guys. And thank you very much for your attendance in this Resource Support Session 3 for Project Management. Looking forward to seeing you in the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.